Okay, so this is very strange. I was going through the picture menu of the Sony BRAVIA 8 OLED I'm reviewing, but for some reason, there's no smooth gradation setting, which has been a feature on every high-end Sony television I've tested until now. I looked at Rating.com's review of the Sony BRAVIA 8, which appeared to hint at the presence of a smooth gradation setting. So could it simply be a difference between UK and US models? Well, I'm not going to purchase the US model and get it shipped to the UK where I'm based, which, from previous experience, cost an arm and a leg. So I bought a plane ticket to New York with the intention of checking out the picture menu of a US version of the Sony BRAVIA 8 OLED. Unfortunately, my connecting flight from Manchester got cancelled, so I didn't even make it onto my flight to the States. Nevertheless, while I was in Tokyo attending CTech 2024 recently, I took the opportunity to check out the Sony BRAVIA 8 at Akihabara, and the Japanese model also didn't appear to have a smooth gradation setting. In case you're wondering, I know Sony's picture menu by heart, so not understanding Japanese characters is not a problem for me. In addition, several other picture settings seemed to have been omitted from this solitary 2024 OLED TV from Sony. 1. The BRAVIA 8 offers only 10-point instead of 20-point white balance adjustments, even after unlocking the custom Pro modes with the Kalman for BRAVIA app. 2. There's no color management system or CMS on the Sony BRAVIA 8, not even for the primary colors. And 3. The automatic ambient light compensation system only adjusts luminance, but not tone curve and color temperature available on recent Sony OLEDs. Now, the Sony BRAVIA 8 is equipped with the same MediaTek Pantone 1000 chipset implemented on last year's A95L flagship QD OLED. So what's happening here? Well, the absence of these picture settings strongly suggests that the MediaTek Pantone SoC on the BRAVIA 8 is not augmented by Sony's own companion chip, even though the OLED TV is still marketed as featuring an XR processor. Another piece of evidence comes in the form of input lag. At 60 FPS, input lag on the Sony BRAVIA 8 measured 13 milliseconds in game mode, dropping to 4.5 milliseconds at 120 FPS. While these figures are some of the most responsive among OLED televisions on the market today, they are clearly lower than previous Sony OLEDs, again pointing to the absence of a coprocessor. The less the video processing you have to do, the lower the input lag. To be fair, despite this, there wasn't much compromise in terms of pure picture processing for SDR content. Upscaling was decent on both test patterns and real-world sub-4K broadcast programs. The TV correctly detected and processed 3/2 and 2/2 cadences in film-based interlaced material, as long as film mode was engaged. Even with motion flow disabled, the Sony BRAVIA 8 OLED performed 4:4 pull-down to present 24 frames per second movies accurately without telesonic judder, and enabling motion flow frame interpolation did not introduce microstutter or frame skipping artifacts in 50Hz broadcast programs aired in PAL countries such as the UK. Let's turn our attention to HDR. The good news is that HDR peak brightness measured 770 nits on a 10% window and 150 nits full fill after calibration to D65 white point, even reaching almost 900 nits on smaller window sizes, which is the highest on record for an 8 series Sony OLED. However, a deeper analysis revealed problematic PQ-EOTF tracking, with shadows and midtones looking darker than reference, and highlights appearing brighter than intended. As a result, in the vast majority of HDR scenes graded to under 200 nits, the HDR presentation on the BRAVIA 8 would look visibly dimmer than on a Sony BVM HX310 mastering monitor. We forwarded our findings to Sony, who managed to reproduce the issue, and in turn suggested that peak luminance medium would yield a more accurate PQ-EOTF tracking. Indeed, when we switched between these two peak luminance options for low to mid APL HDR content, you can see that peak luminance high actually looked paradoxically darker than the medium setting, which shouldn't be the case had the PQ-EOTF tracking been accurate. Furthermore, Because of a more linear PQ-EOTF tracking, peak luminance medium delivered smoother native 10-bit gradation than the default high setting, as demonstrated through this rotating quantization test pattern from the Spears and Munsell UHD HDR benchmark disk. There's one major catch with peak luminance set to medium though. HDR peak brightness would top out at 470 nits even on small window sizes, which significantly reduces the HDR impact, making the Bravia 8 uncompetitive versus rival OLED televisions. Otherwise, DCI-P3 color gamut coverage came in at 99% in UV terms, whereas REC 2020 coverage was 76%, in line with WOLED TVs we've reviewed in recent years. Bright uniformity was excellent on our review sample, manifesting no banding or dirty screen effect, with only very mild pink tinting along the sides owing to the WBE OLED panel. Dark uniformity was not as clean as on other OLED TVs we've tested in recent years, even after putting on some hours and running one cycle of OLED compensation manually. 2 out of the 4 provided HDMI inputs support the full HDMI 2.1 bandwidth of 48 gigabits per second, of which one is the eARC port. Thanks to the onboard MediaTek Pantonic 1000 chipset, the Sony BRAVIA 8 supported 4K 120Hz Dolby Vision gameplay from the Xbox Series X, although we still prefer to play in HDR10. As with most Sony TVs, it's probably best to set Max TML and Max FFTML to 1000 nits for playing HDRG compliant games, owing to the lack of proper HDRG support. VRR including NVIDIA G-Sync worked well to reduce frame drops and tearing artifacts, but just like on every OLED TV we've tested so far, some VRR flicker remain unavoidable in certain VRR games, particularly during more sedate scenes and on static menus. The Sony BRAVIA 8 reproduced full 4K 120Hz resolution, respectable gradation as demonstrated on this grey ramp pattern from the Display HDR app, along with full 444 chroma in game or PC mode. Sound quality on the 55-inch Sony BRAVIA 8 was very good by TV standards. There's decent bass and dialogue clarity, with a highlight being the precise sound localization from the Acoustic Surface Audio Plus technology, where sound is emitted from the OLED screen itself. Let's sum up. The BRAVIA 8 delivers OLED's expected strengths of true blacks, vibrant colors, and wide viewing angles, which are further enhanced by high-quality upscaling and motion handling for which Sony is renowned. However, we were surprised to find several picture settings either missing or pared down on the Sony BRAVIA 8, indicating the absence of a companion chip within the XR processor. Moreover, the default peak luminance setting of high in all HDR picture presets resulted in non-linear PQ-EOTF tracking and coarser 10-bit gradation at certain tones. These could be rectified by dropping peak luminance to medium, which unfortunately would also cap peak brightness to under 500 nits. Due to these shortcomings, the Sony BRAVIA 8 falls somewhat short of the picture quality offered by other mid-range OLED TVs, particularly the LG C4, which not only is cheaper size for size, but also provides 4 HDMI 2.1 ports, better suppression of near-black chrominance overshoot, alongside other benefits we've demonstrated in our side-by-side comparison video you can watch by clicking here.